everybody. This is Michele Hughes from Ageless and Timeless. Today I have a very special guest. I always say that, but I always have very wonderful guests. And his name is Dr. Eric Verdin, and he is the current CEO of the Buck Institute. Eric, welcome to Ageless and Timeless. We're so happy to have you here today. And I know you've been in Europe, so I hope you're all recovered from jet lag.
Yeah, good to be here, Michelle. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so Eric and I met at the Buck Institute was having an inaugural luncheon for or reception for actually the first time in many years. I think you had it in person, right? Because of COVID and all the other issues. And this is the most beautiful IMPay architectural designed building in Nevada, and it's celebrating 25 years this year. Correct, Eric?
Absolutely. Yeah, we opened our doors in 1999. And so here we are, 25-year young.
Yeah, and I was honored at that time to be on their inaugural board. I'm pretty sure I told you this. I think it was Myron Dubain who was at that time. He's passed away, but he was the CEO of Fireman's Fund, which is your neighbor and was, I think, your landlord for a while. But anyway, it was an interesting time because the term aging, which we'll talk about the Buck's mission, but at that time the term aging was really a misnomer because people really didn't understand that aging is actually controllable. It is a disease, as many of your colleagues will say. I'm sure, Eric, that this is something that can be cured. And the Buck's mission, why don't you tell us what the Buck's mission is, Eric?
Yeah, so the Buck mission is actually to look at aging as a variable that we can control, and to some degree. And so parenthetically, I'm not a fan of calling aging a disease, because
Yeah.
I think that would mean that everybody above the age of 30 is actually sick. And I can tell you that there are strong resistance against this idea that we're all sick. So I think aging is a process that can be somewhat controlled and really can change the way you age itself.
Yeah.
And at the end, this manifests itself in the fact that some of us will live to 60 and then pass away. Some of us will live to 100 and still be in good shape at 95. And so what we're really trying to understand is what is the link between what we know are the pathways that regulate aging and the outcome, basically. And, the Buck was started in 1999 on the promise that aging could be studied using the tools of modern genetic engineering. And so we've done this. We've studied aging in a variety of small organisms over the last 25 years. I was hired here 7 years ago by the board for the vision that I offered them, which was that all of the science has gotten to the point that we can start thinking about humans and how do we actually target the aging process in humans? Can we change the equation that we all see among the people who are close to us between aging and becoming sick? And the preliminary data says yes. So we're hard at work trying to really change the way we think about aging. And if you look at the motto of the Institute, it's called Live Better Longer. And it's not only live longer, which would be great, but not if it's at the cost of living sick for longer. So we really think the better is probably the most important part. Can we uncouple the process of aging from chronic disease? And I think that's what we're hard at work on.
Well, I think that I'm really happy that you said that, because I've been somewhat conflicted by a couple of terms. When I'm a member of the American Academy of Anti-Aging, and I'm also a believer that aging is a controllable factor in our lives, and we'll talk about the genetics versus lifestyle and how they influence what aging really can be. So I'm really happy that you have defined this more carefully, because aging truly is not a disease. It's just a controllable mechanism of our experience and our existence that we actually can put some human influence into by our choices. So Thank you for clarifying that.
I can expand on this a little bit if you
Yes,
want. In the fact that the forces that lead to aging are not under our control and they never will be.
right.
And they are, for example, the fact that we live breathing oxygen. Oxygen is an oxidant. That's what it does. That's why the whole idea of oxidative stress comes from.
Mm-hmm.
We're never going to stop breathing oxygen. And so as long as we will, the question is, how do we react to this oxidative damage? And how do our body protects us? The other sources of aging are gamma rays that come from the universe, from stars that are exploding, light years away, are bombarding the Earth nonstop with gamma rays or UV rays. We see this very, very easily on our skin. If you don't use sunscreen, you will see the enormous differences in the way your skin will age. So
Mm-hmm.
humidity, the weight that pulls on our joints and so on. So all of these forces are not going to change in some way. I don't believe in the whole idea of immortality. I don't think it should be part of the discussion
Mm-hmm.
because it's not scientific. You get into the realm of sort of metaphysics and aspirations versus science. So we are focusing on really, how do we enhance our ability to fight these forces that lead us to age? And the field is focused on a whole series of repair mechanisms that allow us to deal with oxidative stress, with UV rays, gamma rays, gravity, and so on. And this is really where the interesting aspect of our work lies, is really understanding, we're not completely passive in the force of these aggressions. We have an incredible ability to react, first to protect ourselves, but also in the future to enhance these protective mechanisms. And this is really what the field is working on.
Mm-hmm. So, and you didn't say inflammation, but that's another very important contributor to aging. And as you just said, all of these issues have goods and bads. I mean, the sun can be. We need the D3. We need the sun in moderation and with protection, and we need oxygen. We wouldn't live without oxygen. We need water, but we know that water it's contaminants that can cause sickness, and and all the other the inflammation, which that can be controlled by making the right choices. So all of these things have both a negative and a positive energy, polar energy, right? So it's just a question of where does the human choice come into, and the science, of course, of knowing what those choices should be. So tell us a little bit more about you, Eric, because our viewers always like to know, who are they listening to or who are they watching, and you have such an amazing history, and I want people to know who you are. So we start by telling everybody that you're European. You come from Belgium. And boy, I had the best muscles of my life when I was in Belgium. My goodness, Brussels has and your beer and your French fries. What, moule frites? Is that how they say it?
Moule frite, yeah, but you forgot about the chocolate.
And then I was just getting to that. That was my final. Was going to be my final. And actually, I always order Belgian chocolate here in the States. So it is some of the finest dark chocolate ever, anywhere. Is even beats France, I think.
I agree. I completely agree. I think when people tell me they don't like dark chocolate, I tell them you have never tried Belgian dark chocolate. You can eat 80% black chocolate that doesn't taste bitter at all. So it's really I take pride in the fact that my countrymen have refined the art of extracting all the bitterness so that you can enjoy the strongest chocolate possible.
Yeah. And do you have a secret source to getting that chocolate here in the States now that you're living here?
Well, I mean, I do travel a lot, so airports. I
Yes.
think that would be, if you go anywhere in Europe, you will find, even chocolates like Godiva or
Great.
there are so many brands that are Belgian. All the ones that you've seen are all famous Belgian chocolates.
Right. Like I always get the lint when I'm in Switzerland, I always get the lint, but I didn't when I look on Amazon, I'm never sure that I'm really getting the real Belgian chocolate. So I just wondered if there was any one company that does distribute to the US that we could all benefit from knowing and ordering from.
Not that I know, but I'd be happy to look into it.
Today's podcast is brought to you by Qigenics. From stem cell therapy to lifestyle coaching, Qigenics is the perfect place to go for all your health and wellness needs. This health clinic is amazing at getting you personalized medicine and wellness that is unique to you. Use the code Ageless and you'll get 20% off your first service with them. Go to www.qigenix.com to find out more information about these powerful methods. Okay. Okay. So, all right. So you have your MD from the University of Liège,
Yes.
and you matriculated to Harvard Medical School. So how did that happen? How did you decide to leave Europe and come to the United States?
It was actually really an interesting story. So I was in the year before the last year of medical school, and one of my professors of internal medicine noticed me and approached me after a class and asked me whether I had considered a career in research. And I told him I had. Actually, I was really interested in research throughout medical school. And he told me that he had a friend in Boston that he recommended I go spend some time with. And so we organized all of this. I really had I mean, I was the first person in my family to go to college. And of course I knew about Harvard. Everybody knows about Harvard in Europe, but I ended up in one of the Harvard hospital, and it was for a 6 month period, and it was really a transforming experience at all levels. First time leaving home, coming with a suitcase in a different country, speaking the language, but I guess my English level was what I call Beatles level. I knew all the Beatles songs and I knew what they were saying, but I really couldn't speak. And from there, I was catapulted into a clinic and asked to go see patients. And it was the first 3 months, I still remember to this day, I would go home and my mouth would hurt because I was trying to, French is spoken with the front of the mouth.
Right.
English is spoken with the back of the mouth, and
Right.
that transition. And I did not want to speak English sounding like a French person. So and nothing against the French, but I just knew there was a better way to do it. So I practiced and practiced and eventually learned, and really by being thrown into the fire. And it was a life transforming experience at multiple levels. First, coming out of a small town in Belgium, being exposed to some of the best teachers in the world, frankly, and some of the best students in the world. And I held my own, I had a great time. And so I had to go back to Belgium to finish, graduated, but I only had one idea in mind, is to come back to Boston, and which I did after 1 year of clinical training in Belgium. I came back and then joined a lab at Harvard Medical School, where I started doing full-time research. And initially, this was supposed to be a 3-year stint for a so-called postdoc, but I never came out of the lab. So I've been working in the lab ever since, and just really trying to study, use the tools of molecular biology to study disease processes and so on.
Yeah, so your background is interesting in that you really didn't practice as a doctor treating patients. You've been really just those few years.
Just 2 years of internal medicine, yes.
2 years, yeah. And so, what was it that made you decide to research versus treating patients?
The pure joy of the research process, the discovery, and there was no competition in my mind. I just really enjoyed being in the lab and doing experiment, testing ideas and so on. And, I wouldn't say that I never missed the clinic, but it was just one of these choices. Whenever I had the opportunity to go back to the clinic or to stay in the lab always won. And I tell people that one of these privileged people who has the feeling that I never worked a day in my life. I was always, getting up in the morning, wanting to go to the lab, test experiments, and just live in this world of ideas and concepts and so on. And what's interesting now is also because of the work on aging, I have been, in the last 7 years, I've been brought back way closer to the clinic because a lot of our work has implications for humans. And so in some way, it's been a full circle, after training in medicine, going to do research, and I did research at the most basic level, on epigenetics mechanism. Eventually, now going back to the clinic I feel that I've gone through the full circle, and which is, I'm part of a somewhat dying breed. The whole idea of the physician scientist is a challenging one. It's hard to recruit people to come and do this, but I think it's a really important one because we bring a unique perspective to the research enterprise. And I see this, in the colleagues that I hire. I love to work with PhDs, but also, when I see colleagues that are MDs, there's a different perspective, which I think is really nicely complementary to what the PhDs are offering.
So what would you say has changed in the 7 years that you've been at the Buck Institute? What were you doing back then, and how do you compare that with what you're doing now, and how is that making a difference?
Yeah. So before I came to the Buck, I was at the Gladstone Institute, which is a private research institution that's affiliated with UCSF in San Francisco. And I was running a lab studying basic mechanism of aging. I was also studying HIV, which is a topic that we've worked on for many years. And so essentially I was running a lab. I was also associate director of one of the institutes at the Gladstone. So I had some light administrative duties. What has changed in the last 7 years is when I moved to the Buck, I became the president and the CEO. So I took on, the 300 employees and a completely new job. So I still run a lab here, which is not, still continuing to study aging, but I also have a completely different job, which is to lead an organization, to have a vision for where the organization is going, and, think about lead an administration, everything that comes out, running a 300 people organization. The other thing also that I had not appreciated, which I've actually enjoyed it, is given this position of leadership at the Buck, I am one of the people that is able to become a voice for the whole field. We are the largest organization focused on aging. And so along with this position comes the sort of implicit authority in the field, and which I've enjoyed, by the way, because I think our field is full of promise, but it's also full of pitfalls and dangers. And I really view what we're doing as we're in this for the long game, and we're going to be changing the way medicine is practiced, and we're going to change human health. But I think we have to do this in a really careful and considerate manner, and this is that's the voice I try to take in the field. So you will find me being somewhat conservative in terms of my predictions, in terms of what we're going to be able to do, but still extremely ambitious in terms of what I think we might be able to do. So, I think that this is where I am today. I think I have the best job in the world, possibly.
I think you are literally the luckiest man alive, because one, right at the heart of finding ways to live longer, better, and to be right in the science of that, and to then be able to help others, which is the philanthropic and the vision of Leonard and Beryl Buck when they funded the Buck Institute. So I can't think of anyone that has a better positioning, and I'm really quite envious of you having to be able to go around the world and speak to people and influence people. That's in a little small way what I try to do here at Ageless and Timeless, and of course, having people like you to influence our viewers and to understand that changing of behavior is actually the first step, is recognizing what the truth is and then doing something about it. And of course, the truth can sometimes be relative. I mean, look at the changes that have occurred just in your 7 years in terms of what the views are on how to live longer, better. So let's talk about some of those techniques and technologies, because you've also been very active in the biotech world, which is living here in the Bay Area, you know, the heart of our economy. So you've influenced that sector as well. So, you know, when Peter Diamandis, I know we talked about him. I know he's a friend of yours. And when he spoke at A4M a couple of years ago, he said that the last 10 years in the aging world has been accomplished more in 10 years than the last 100 years. I think that's a pretty bold statement, and of course you're right in the heart of it. So would you agree with what he said, and why, if you
Yeah,
do?
to some degree, yes. There's been, I would say, probably more than 10 years, last 20 years. We've changed our understanding of aging completely, and we've been able to identify a whole series of interventions and mechanisms that really significantly increase lifespan. And so, you know, initially when people were working on this idea that aging could be modulated, uh, they were met with sort of a derision. You know, people thought this is just not going to happen because aging was thought of as a sort of non-specific random process that you could not control. And you cannot control oxygen, you cannot control gravity, you cannot control gamma rays. What people really had not appreciated is the degree to which all of these protective mechanisms can be modulated. And that's essentially what the field has been busy. Initially, you know, we and others identified genes that control the aging process. And initially, these were thought to be exceptions. People say, yeah, you found one, it changes aging and blah, 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 but it's the exception. It turns out in the little worm that we study, there are more than 700 genes that control lifespan. So it's not hard to find these genes. And every time you find a gene, there's a protein linked to it, and a protein means a potential drug target. So if we take all of this data at face value, what it implies is that in the future, we will have a plethora of targets and therefore molecules, drugs, that will allow us to intervene in the aging process. And I should say, we're not there yet. And it's probably going to be 5 to 10 to 15 years before we have a true anti-aging medicine, you know, in a clinic that humans can use safely. That being said, we've also identified a whole series of lifestyle factors that are really having extremely powerful effects. And my argument has been to everyone who, you know, I talk to is don't rush, you know, for the supplement, because many of these supplements that are available today, despite the advertisements, are not proven to actually increase lifespan. But focus on the lifestyle factors, which are incredibly powerful. You know, I have made the point, which I think is backed by data, that most of us could expect to live to between 90 and 95 in good health if we want to live optimally. And so that's already a lot better than what most of us do. I'd say most of us, you know, as a country, most people live healthy until around age 65, and then the problems start.
Right.
And so imagine a different world where most of us would live an extra 30 years in good health. That's on the table today. And as a matter of fact, we have communities within the US where life expectancy right now is almost 90 years old. And I can give it to you because some of these communities are close to us, like Ross is a good example. Life expectancy in Ross today is 88. Not everybody in Ross exercises, not everybody in Ross is optimized in terms of nutrition. But despite this, you know, the average is 88. So my prediction that most of us could live to 95 in good health is not outlandish. And the problem is it's hard to convince people that this is actually true, but the data is there. And you know, the knowledge is there also in terms of what you should be doing. So my passion right now is to work with people and to really point to them what is it that you should be doing to maximize your lifespan. So we have the answers, and we have the tools to measure it. So I think it's really incumbent upon each of us to actually take this seriously and really change the way we are aging.
Well, first of all, let me just tell people who may not be from our area that Ross is a very, actually reminds me a lot of where I grew up in New England. I grew up outside of Boston, but um, it has a kind of a New England feel with the deciduous trees and so forth. But it is a very economically probably one of the wealthiest communities in California. Belvedere, Ross, Hillsborough, Atherton. I'm thinking of Northern Cal, and then of course Southern Cal is all a whole different thing. But I think the socioeconomic aspect of aging, of wellness, is a big factor, and something that I hope you'll be addressing, because we want this to be for all. That means that even in the socioeconomic neighborhoods that are less affluent, there should be the information and the tools available. Would that be a vision that you might have for the Buck Institute?
Absolutely. And there's nothing that worries me more than this perception by some people in the field that, longevity research is medicine by the rich for the rich.
Correct.
Of course, this is compounded by the fact that some of our donors are, the founders of the big tech companies,
Right.
Google and so on.
Right.
But I tell people there's nothing different in this. They are the wealthiest people right now. They support medical research just the same way the Rockefellers and Mellon and the other big fortunes from a century ago were supporting medical research. Rockefeller University was founded based on oil money. So I
Right.
think there's nothing different in this respect. That being said, I think what you hinted at is a concept called the social determinants of health, which is the idea that one of the strongest predictor of your life expectancy is your zip code.
Yeah.
And the question is, why is that? It's not only about money, which is really interesting. So it's not, that so your personal wealth does not necessarily correlate with your life expectancy, but your zip code does. And I think what we think is at play here is a whole series of factors that are obviously linked to some degree to economic stability. But if you're working three jobs to survive and feed your family, it's obvious that exercise is not a priority. If you live in an urban desert where there are no stores that have fresh vegetables or organic food, that's another factor. If your
Mm-hmm.
kids have to go, are subjected to lead poisoning from poorly maintained buildings, if you live right next to the highway, because you'll have access to, be exposed to pollution. So, the social determinants of health, there's a whole series of factors that are somewhat related to economic status, but it goes beyond this. It really is the environment in which you're living, the stress level that you have. Obviously, health becomes, or health maintenance, so focusing on your health, on your well-being, becomes a luxury at some point. You have to have some economic stability to be able to do this. So that being said, there are a number of things that I think we're very excited about that still could be changed to really change this equation between poverty and poor health. But it's part of a whole continuum. So as a nation, right now we're seeing something pretty sad and worrisome, which is the health of people is splitting.
Yeah.
The wealthy and the economically stable people are living longer and longer. The poor actually are living shorter and shorter. I mean, we see
Yeah.
this even in terms of obesity. Obesity rates are completely unequally distributed across the country. And obesity is a very strong risk factor for accelerated aging. So
Right.
I think these are important society discussions. I mean, people ask me, how are you going to solve this? I said, well, I'm not a politician. That's not my job. My job is to point the way to the politicians to help them understand what are the factors that you can implement in the population to actually maximize health for everyone. And for this, I one of my pet peeves is the whole food industry,
Yeah.
which I I would claim is will be looked upon in the next 20 years as the tobacco industry. In a way,
Yeah.
it's an industry that does not have your and my well-being at heart. It has the well-being of its stockholders, and so I think there are going to be a number of really tough examinations of what they're selling us, who's eating it, and what is the true benefit of eating, what we call these ultra processed foods.
And the fact that the United States is so low, we're what, 31st?
Yes.
The emerging of the powerful nations in the world, the Western nations, let's say, and we are 31st. How can that be? We're one of the wealthiest, probably the wealthiest country in the world. At least we used to be.
Yes.
But yet we're the 31st. What can, I mean, that seems like a daunting task to try to get us back to where we should be. So how do we do that? I know you just said I mean, obviously I'm answering my own question, but I think our viewers already are well informed to know that there are 5 pillars of wellness, of well-being, because they've watched other of my podcasts. But I think maybe that's where we should start to answer that question. But let me let you talk about that. But I think include the 5 pillars of anti-aging as part of that answer, if you would, Eric.
Yeah. So the first number that I want to leave your audience with is the fact that when you look at the factors that contribute to your longevity, it's actually 93% determined by lifestyle factors, only
Correct.
about 7% by your genes. That
Correct.
means you cannot blame your parents, and that means it's on you, it's on me to choose or to make the life choices that will basically allow you to live better longer. Now, a number of epidemiological studies have been conducted that have looked at all of what are these factors and how do they rank. I think about them as sort of accounts in which you can invest. And these accounts are first nutrition. And we can go back to every one of them. Obviously, it could be a whole podcast about what I think would be optimal nutrition versus not optimal nutrition. But I'll just list them. Nutrition, physical activity. I don't even like the term exercising because it implies that you have to sweat. You don't have to sweat, you just have to walk. So physical activity, stress mitigation and sleep, really important because I think this is what allows the command center, your brain, to make all the right decision. I can tell you if I don't sleep enough for one night, the next morning, I'm craving a burger, carbohydrates. I'm craving all of the foods that are not good for me. And typically, if I'm not well rested, I will not have the willpower to go through it. I won't feel like exercising. So it's really interesting how the brain is really, I think, in my opinion, should be prioritized because it will determine everything, your ability to make the right choices. So nutrition, physical activity, stress mitigation, and sleep. Then, last but not least, because actually it was identified as the most important aspect, is social connections.
Correct.
How many people love you? How many people can you count on to really be able to open your heart? It can be anyone. It can be your spouse, it can be your children, it can be your neighbor. It's just being surrounded by people with whom you have deep relationships is really one of the strongest predictors. And one of the things we see across the world is quite often is multi-generational families living together. Imagine the contrast that we have where many of our older individuals get parked into homes where they are lonely and not doing well versus living with your family. So I think there's a lot to be learned from what's happening in different cultures in terms of how we can maximize our own longevity.
And I think with Dan Buettner writing the Blue Zones, all the Blue Zones except one are not in the United States. The only one is Loma Linda, which is, has a religious element to it that is focused on human connection and all the other 4 pillars you just mentioned. But it's interesting that all these other ones, in Sardinia, in Costa Rica, where, all the different locations are all more primitive cultures.
Yes.
Why is that? What have we lost as a country in the, original intention and purpose of our lives? And by the way,
I,
that's one other book.
I'll tell you what we've lost. We've lost real food. Many of
Yeah,
these cultures are relying on simple food that quite often they grow themselves.
right.
They don't have to be complicated, but I was in Europe for the last actually month in Greece and in France, and I'm always struck by how the simplest thing you go to Greece and like a Greek salad is really so simple. There's
Yeah,
no one that cannot prepare a Greek salad, and it's so delicious and it's so
yeah,
healthy. So and you see this, and then you realize you come back, and the first thing you watch in the airport is a McDonald's or whatever, some company like this. I don't want to single
right,
out McDonald's. It's just one of a whole industry, but and the type of food that they eat and they serve. So you see the contrast, and it's a no-brainer. Those cultures also, many people don't have cars, so they walk. They tend to their garden. They also quite often live in extended communities. They live together, so the sense of community is much stronger. And
hmm,
so you have your recipe there. They don't have access to phones nonstop, so they can actually sleep. Uh,
hmm,
so I was in Fiji. A personal experience as an aside. I was in Fiji at Christmas, and we were in a resort area, and we spent hours sitting around a campfire with the locals who were just singing and having fun. I have not been in an environment where I just felt such a strong sense of community. And it wasn't forced, it was really just genuine. They just loved to be together. And at first I thought, what are we going to do sitting together around a campfire? But it was the most fun I had had in a long time. And it just really teaches you what our true aspirations are. It's not fancy cars. It's just being together and laughing and playing music and just the community of men. We are incredibly social animals, and we've seen the damage that splitting us from each other happened during the pandemic. How we had an epidemic of loneliness where people were stuck behind a Zoom screen or whatever, and we
right.
saw depression rates increasing, and we're still seeing to this point. We see mortality increasing. People are lonely, and many of them have not recuperated from the loneliness that was imposed by this by these restrictions, which I'm not condemning. I'm just saying this is, I mean, the public authorities did what they thought was the best to prevent the pandemic from spreading, but I don't think anybody really had measured to what degree there would be human suffering associated with the isolation. And I think we're learning.
Yeah, and I think the other adjunct to the human connection is having purpose.
Yes,
Life. And look, I would love to live to 100, but I certainly don't want to live to 100 if I'm not feeling the way I feel today, and I can't make a difference in the world, and I'm just living a life of loneliness. That would be pretty awful.
I
It would be,
agree.
that would not be the way to spend the golden years. But so yeah, I think having a purpose. I think when people ask you, "Do you want to live to 100?" The adjunct question to that is, "Well, do you have a reason that you want to live to
Yes.
100? Is there something you're doing in your life that you feel is making you happy and making a difference?"
You're totally
So,
right. And having a sense of purpose is an incredibly important, uh, thing to have in your life. And we see this, for example, when people were forced to retire, as we see in some countries in Europe, at 65, you're forced to retire. We see a peak of mortality
mm,
the year that ensues, where, especially for men who tend to identify more closely, traditionally more closely to their work. Once
mhm,
you rip this away from them, many of them are sort of lost, and we see a peak of mortality that happens until they readjust and find another sense of purpose, whether it be grandchildren or a hobby or whatever. But so yeah, the sense of purpose is incredibly important as well.
So, Eric, who has inspired you in your career?
Are so many people I could not start to name them one of the other. I mean, the first one was my postdoc mentor, Ron Kahn, who is a professor at Harvard, and I I came into his lab with little research experience, and he was an incredible mentor. He just ran a lab where he gave us independence. He, encouraged us to think out of the box, gave us the freedom to pursue our ideas. There are many different ways to mentor trainees, and I always appreciated to this day the freedom that he gave us. And then, I've been inspired my whole career by colleagues. One of the beauty of the work uh, of science is that many of us are not motivated by greed or money, or we're just motivated by the joy of discovery.
Mm-hmm.
I've taken a lot of joy over the years in really you know the simple joy of discovering something is really something that cannot be beaten. In terms of my work right now, if I have to think of one of the mentors, some of the people really has influenced me the most in my readings and so on would be Lee Hood, uh,
Yeah.
who is was a professor at in Washington, Seattle, and University of Washington, Seattle, and I've had actually the incredible joy and privilege to recruit him to the Buck. So he's with us along with one of his trainees, who now is an independent professor, Nathan Price. And Lee really saw, first he was behind the whole genomics discovery, the sequencing of the human genome by inventing the first DNA sequencing machine. But he's also was the first one to see the power of big data in medicine and
Mm-hmm.
introduced a concept so-called P4 medicine, which is a form of medicine. I'll forget one of the P's, but which is preventative, participatory, and no, I should forgetting two of them. Anyway, so which is the whole vision of medicine that changes from the way medicine is practiced today. So today medicine is reacting to a disease. So if you have a heart attack, you go see a doctor, you get treated, and you get better. What P4 medicine is really dealing with is the idea that the seed of that heart attack were planted probably 15, 20 years earlier. So can identify the very early process and actually, rather than treat you or save your life when you have a heart attack, can we prevent it from occurring at the first place? And it turns out that one of the key aspects of implementing P4 medicine is understanding the aging process, because it turns out the aging process is the biggest driver of all of these diseases that we and our close ones are suffering from when we get old. So having Lee here at the Buck and Nathan Price, who we just recruited this month, I think is really allowing us to start planning how are we going to change medicine for the future, to do exactly what you mentioned, allowing all of us to live to 90 in good health. And we're not talking about immortality. I don't think it's attainable. I don't, frankly, I would never have this word here. But we can do a lot better than what we're doing today. And I have an 80, almost 90 years old mother who's suffering from macular degeneration. Uh, a father-in-law who's 91 who's suffering from heart failure. So I can see, I've seen my father die from lung cancer. So I've seen all the suffering that comes when you get close to the end. It doesn't mean we're going to be ending all suffering. That's not going to happen, but we can certainly do better in what we're doing today as a society.
Well, I have to tell you, I was jumping out of my chair at the Buck when you had your event a few months back, and Lee Hood was the keynote speaker along with you. And that's how I met you actually that day. But I also invited Lee Hood, who will be on our podcast in October. So the reason I was jumping out of my chair is because of my long history with the Buck. And when the Buck first started, there was far more allopathic leanings, let's say. And today, with you and Lee Hood and others, now I don't know Nathan Price, but I want to hear more about him and how we might actually invite him on the podcast. So,
You should. Nathan is brilliant also.
right. So, but this movement towards functional medicine, and that's what he was talking about with the P4s. That that is such a huge shift in thinking, and in the science is supporting it. That's what I think some of the more traditional allopathic thinkers may resist that for a while, but I think over time it's starting already. You can see what's happened just in the years that you've been preaching to the new choir.
Absolutely.
So yeah, so let's go back to those protocols that are affecting aging, like the telomeres and DNA methylation and stem cells and all the techniques and protocols that are influencing these changes. What is the buck doing, and how have you made gains in those areas of the science?
So maybe I can just speak about what directions we are working on. So aging is a multifactorial process. It has many root causes. There are many mechanisms that fight aging. At this point, we are still at the stage in the field where we are identifying all of the pieces of the engine. We haven't been able to put the engine together and to say, this is actually how it works. So we have a fragmented understanding of what aging is. But it's been enough to identify all of the important pieces of the engine. So I don't want to diminish, what has been accomplished, but there's still some really big questions that we don't fully understand. For example, let's say we know inflammation plays a role. We know stem cells plays a role, stem cell degradation. We know proteostasis, the maintenance of your protein, DNA damage repair, mitochondrial function. There's so many, there's a number of papers that have been published describing these so-called hallmarks of aging, which are sort of a catalog of all of the things that go wrong during aging. And my lab works on a factor called epigenetics, which is understanding how does the environment actually change the way you age. Mm-hmm. So all of these, and we have here at the Buck, because we have 300 employees working together, organized in about 25 different groups. Each group is headed by a faculty member, and this faculty member has the complete autonomy to decide what they're working on. So we're not like a company in a way that Eric as the CEO decides, okay, this is what we're doing today. We recruit the very best people in the world, and we allow them to pursue their ideas. And based on the fact and the knowledge that there's a lot more collective intelligence in each of these individuals than there is just in me deciding what everybody else should be doing. So, and that's the whole idea of an academic research institute. That is, we allow people the complete freedom to pursue what they want. And some of the stories become very big. I'll give you an example. The whole idea of studying senescence. This was pioneered by Judy Campisi, who was one of the founding faculty members here at the Buck, and who sadly passed away earlier this year. But she really was the person who identified senescence, was able to identify molecular markers, came up with the concept of senolysis, the idea of killing these senescent cells, created one of the first biotech companies in the aging space called Unity that was targeting senescent cells. And her legacy goes on here at the Buck. We still have many labs that are still studying senescence, but we also have labs studying mitochondrial function or stem cell biology. So one of the things that I really love about the Buck is that we are all focused on one problem, and we come at it in a multidisciplinary fashion where everybody, every person brings their own model, their own thinking. We collaborate a lot together. We have joint seminars. We share lab meetings. So it really is a unique environment. that's in some way, for me, exemplifies many of the things that can go right in human relationship, which is, working together to solve problems.
And you've done it in a decentralized way, as that's really kind of the core of American corporate thinking, that the more modern and more successful corporations have decentralized and allowed more people to have more independence and responsibility. So I think by doing that, you have allowed people to, innovate and to embrace those opportunities and those challenges. Before we go, Eric, I wanted just to mention something. I know you and I have talked about mTOR and about caloric restriction and intermittent fasting. I know a lot of our viewers are very interested in this. We are on Muscle and Fitness, one of our distribution sites, and of course these Muscle and Fitness viewers are all looking for the answers to stay not only healthy but fit for the rest of their lives. So what do you think about caloric restriction? What's your current philosophy about it, and what would you share with our viewers about whether or not that is an approach to take in longevity?
So calorie restriction is the idea for your viewers who are not familiar with this is the idea that if you take animals in a laboratory setting and you restrict the amount of calories that they would eat by 10%, 20%, 30%, 40%. The more you restrict, the longer they live. Now, this has been observed in almost all animal species. One of the most robust observations that you can do in the aging space. And so this has led some people to say, well, maybe we should do this in humans. And there's a calorie restriction society of people who are on calorie restriction. Now, a colleague of mine sort of sarcastically said that, it might not make you live forever, but it will certainly feel that way. And frankly, it is very hard to do. I've met the people who are doing this. They're very skinny. They're always cold. So it takes incredible discipline to live through this. I would say it's not for most people, not for 99%. Now, there's another way to reap many of the same benefits, which is fasting or intermittent fasting. And so there are a number of protocols that are emerging. So the two ways that the field is going is sort of this intermittent fasting regimen, where people are allowing a fasting period during every day, for example, having an eating window of 8 hours and a 16-hour fast every day. That's what I do and many other people do.
Right.
Or having a sort of a 3-day fast once every 2 months. Some people doing this. Some people do 1-day fast every week. There are many, many, many different modalities. And I would say at the end, many of those have been shown to actually have a beneficial effect on your health. So that having some degree of fasting is important. There's also a whole other side to it, which is the identification and the discovery of these drugs that we call calorie restriction mimetics. So these are drugs that fool your body in terms of thinking that you are fasting. And they are, many of them have actually been shown to increase lifespan and health span. So, I mean, your audience might have heard about metformin, rapamycin, but there are many others that are emerging. It turns out that many of the drugs that we find that modulate lifespan in mammals always tend to target metabolism for some reason. So I think, on the other hand, I tell people, going on metformin is also a decision because it has side effects. For example, some people have seen, testosterone level decrease after metformin. So the key thing to understand is, have you my personal philosophy in terms of these drugs, interventions, and so on is I would not consider a drug that targets the aging process unless a subject or a patient has actually gone through an optimization of everything else. So once you've optimized your sleep, your nutrition, your physical activity, your human connections, if you want to go one step further, then there are a number of interventions. But this should all be done, in my opinion, under medical supervision. And it should be done actually under, while testing. So you can actually see the effect of what you're doing, not just blindly hoping. Because the truth of the matter is none of these interventions have been shown to actually benefit humans. And
They haven't been tested on humans yet. They've been
No,
tested on mice. And so that right there is enough of a red flag.
exactly. And they
Yeah,
can do harm. They can do harm. So
yeah,
this is what people have to realize. You know, it's not once you move into the realm of supplements and drugs, some of them will do harm. And I am worried about sometimes the sort of a naive enthusiasm of some people who jump into everything that just pops up on Instagram
yeah,
to test it on themselves. Many of these supplements are not regulated
yeah.
and certainly are not proven. But that's not the case always. There always are. There are some companies, and I work with a number of them that are delivering products that are being tested. So I think I'm optimistic for the future in terms of
Right.
our ability to decide what's working and what's not. But we're not
And,
there yet.
and I think the semiglutides are also in that category. You know,
Yes.
they're unproven. I mean, yes, they were originally designed for diabetes, but then they took on a life of their own in the weight loss world, and look what's happened. And yet so many people are now experiencing side effects from some of those drugs. So yeah, I mean, I think caution is the with a capital C, you know,
Yes.
in terms of taking any kind of chemical into the body. So I really appreciate that you made that point. Well, Eric, we've run out of time, as I knew would happen. I told your assistant Lauren that the time would go by so fast. I think that's because of the energy of the two people that are talking here. But I do look forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks at the Farley Bar in Cavallo Point. The nice that we're neighbors and we can have a nice little tete-a-tete there. So I look forward to that. And I want to thank you for taking the time today. And may I contact you about reaching out to Nathan Price?
Like, yeah, absolutely. Would love to
Okay.
do this. Happy to introduce you to him.
Yeah, and I know you said you also wanted to suggest Peter Diamandis. That would be for next year. We're booking into, so I'll get back in touch with you later. But thank you again. And before we go, is there any one parting statement you would like to make to our viewers after participating in this podcast today? Is there one piece of information or truth that you want to leave us with?
I think, stay away from fad diets. There is no single diet that has been shown to be more conducive to longevity. Not
Mm,
vegan, not paleo, not
yeah,
vegetarian, not whatever, not keto. Uh, Try to include some degree of fasting in your routine.
yeah,
Stay away from processed food and
yeah.
focus on the true healthy food. And if you've never done it, um, wear a CGM, a continuous glucose monitor.
Uh,
There are a number of doctors in the space who know how to do this. I think it is an important aspect in your optimizing your food, which is to minimize the sugar spikes that you get
mhm,
eating, unprocessed sugars or
right,
sugars that are too processed. So I think this would be from the nutrition. The last one is physical activity is the panacea.
right.
And I'll just tell you that some data. Walking 30 minutes a day, which is 15 minutes in the morning, 15 minutes at night, will cut down your risk of heart disease, stroke, type 2 diabetes, macular degeneration, Alzheimer's, and Parkinson's by 40%.
Wow.
So if this is not enough, there are no medicine that will do this in terms of prevention. And this is 30 minutes a day, 15 minutes in the morning, 15 minutes at night. Very
Easy.
profound effect.
It is so easy. And if you can't find a place to walk, if you're living in an urban area, then get on a machine, a stationary
Yes.
bike, or any one of the gym machines would help as well. So yes, I agree. Well, Eric, thank you so much,
My
and I really
pleasure.
appreciate your time. Take care. Have a
Thank
wonderful
you.
weekend. All
Good
right.
to see
Bye
you,
bye.
Michelle. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.